You oversee government spending and related rules. Can you assure this committee that you've never used government resources as part of a leadership campaign?
I most definitely can confirm that I have never done that and would never do that. And I actually am surprised that you would ask the question, but I have never done that.
Thank you, Minister. I think people understand that it's an important question. Have any directives been issued to ensure that other ministers are following the rules as well?
Ministers and public servants are expected to follow all rules, period.
But no directives have been issued specifically on that?
It is important for everyone to follow the policies of the Government of Canada, as well as the conflict of interest policies that all MPs are required to follow.
Thank you, Minister. I think that's clear on the record in terms of what was asked and what was answered. You know, we're here reviewing Indigenous contracting as well. Documents have been received that reveal that a small number of nominally Indigenous firms were able to act as brokers between the federal government and other potentially non-Indigenous companies, simply getting contracts and subcontracting. This allows the contracts to fit into an Indigenous contracting quota, even though Indigenous people do not actually benefit because the subcontractors may be all or mostly non-Indigenous. These companies are essentially using the Dalian or GC Strategies model. I want to ask you, when a company gets a contract under an Indigenous set-aside, is there an expectation or a requirement that some percentage of subcontracts also go to Indigenous firms?
Indigenous Services Canada manages the list of Indigenous businesses that are qualified Indigenous contracting companies, but PSPC manages this overall, and I will say that departments are responsible for making a request to IST to conduct a post-award audit, and the audit has to be requested when there's any suspicion at all that the requirements of the applicable policy haven't been met through delivery, and Indigenous Services Canada.
Can I just clarify my question, Minister, and I'd love to hear your response on this. Do the requirements include that a certain percentage of subcontracts from an Indigenous contracting situation, that a certain percentage of the subcontracts go to Indigenous companies? And are the subcontractors tracked in any way?
Right now, the percentage is 33%. In other words, the contractor's delivery of goods or services and monitoring the contractor's compliance with the 33% Indigenous content requirement for contracting companies.
Okay. Thank you. That's what I was looking for, and I appreciate that, the one-third requirement there. Is that tracked? Because the committee asked for subcontracting information, and we received, in almost all cases, zero information about subcontracts. So I'm a bit mystified about how the government would know if that requirement is being met if subcontracting is not being tracked in any case.
I actually so much money. Just want to clarify my answer, and then I want to add one thing. It's 33% for the contract. That would be verified in the post-audit that ISC does. And on your question about subcontractors, I actually think it is a good point, and I think that we should do continual work to be able to track the suppliers in the subcontracting process.
Yeah, Minister, I really appreciate that comment. That's the first time I've ever questioned a minister and had an acknowledgement of an important point, because I think there is a gap. We received no information on subcontracts. We didn't get an answer from the previous minister. So I hope we'll have agreement from this committee, from you, to refine that process so we're actually tracking subcontracting information. I want to ask one more question on this. There seem to be instances where a few small number of companies are getting an outsized proportion of overall contracts. How much would you say is too much for a single company to get of that total share of Indigenous procurement? Keeping in mind that there's over 600 Indigenous communities in this country, how much would be too much for a single company to get of that total?
I do not have the
She's stunned.
ability to respond to that question without an overall amount of the actual contract. But I will say that the principle that we operate under is fair, open, and transparent competition. And the 5% floor for Indigenous contracts that we established as a government was meant to ensure that Indigenous suppliers have access to government contracts.
Now she's just going on.
Thank you very much. Ms. Atwin, please.
That was actually productive.